over there? No, yeah. Well, you come with your wife. Yeah. Well, that's, I'm not there. I know there's something. Your wife does that? Yeah. I know. I remember that's all. It was just like that. Yeah. Just like that.
That's a full-time job.
Well, I don't see you on Friday.
No, I'm calibrating on
Take care.
You know, I did, we did the baton switch.
Well, from there, all they don't reach the today we get yeah, I moved the grandma. Yeah. Sure. We used to have a towing company. And we used to tow the boat.
No, you're talking about more.
Yeah.
So,
Randy was you got her own. And I don't remember him. I remember his brother, Mike. Unbelievable baseball. No, but I played baseball. It was unbelievable. Yeah, so well, I forgot their father. Dick, he's right up to my father.
he's talking about it.
So it's good when I get the box. You know, obviously I know you don't need a bargain. Yeah. Yeah. That's usually the 100. Yeah, you're okay. I said hi. You see your father-in-law. That's a reality. It's a reality. Well, that's good. It keeps you young.
Workout ready? Your day? Like a Japanese.
Do you have grandchildren?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, he age is just up there.
Dear friends, I'm Cantor Sarah Sager from Congregation Mishkan Or. We gather this afternoon to remember and to celebrate the life of one who filled our world with his love, his goodness, his extraordinary spirit, and outstanding example. In humility and gratitude, we turn to the wisdom of our tradition for comfort, for guidance, and for understanding. Throughout the centuries, whenever our people felt lost, confused, adrift, without direction, they returned to the Psalms for guidance and for wisdom. They especially loved Psalm 121, Esa'inai el haharim, me'ayin yavo ezri. I lift my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from God, creator of heaven and of earth. Esa'inai el haharim, me'ayin yavo ezri. Esa'inai el harim, me'ayin yavo ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai, osei shamayim v'aretz. Ezri me'im Adonai, osei shamayim v'aretz. Esa'inai el harim, me'ayin yavo ezri. Adonai, what are we that you have regard for us? What are we that you are mindful of us? We are like a breath. Our days are like a passing shadow. We come and go like grass which in the morning shoots up renewed, and in the evening fades and withers. You cause us to turn to dust, saying, Return, O mortal creatures. Would that we were wise, that we understood whither we are going, for when we die we carry nothing away. Our glory does not accompany us. Mark the wholehearted, and behold the upright. They shall have peace. For those of you for whom the 23rd Psalm is familiar, I invite you to join with me in its recitation. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. When I die, remember me with a smile and laughter. If thoughts of me provoke no love, only sadness and tears, I ask that I be soon forgotten. Give what's left of me away to children and old ones who wait to die. And if you must cry, cry for your brother or sister who walks in grief beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around anyone and give them what you need to give to me. You can love me most by letting love live within the circle of your arms, embracing the frightened ones. Love doesn't die. People do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away. My dear Jeff and Deborah, dear Jerry, dear Michael and Amy, Marty, dear family, dear friends. Just 1 week ago, I received a message from Jerry indicating that her father was in hospice care and was not expected to live more than a few more days. As soon as I could, I went out to the Eliza facility to see him. I was a bit anxious to visit, as I did not know what to expect. When I entered the room, he was resting, and he appeared so frail that I would not have disturbed him. Jerry, however, who was sitting next to the bed, touched his arm, and he came instantly and fully awake with a spontaneous, "Hi, Sarah." I was absolutely amazed. In the literal blink of an eye, his vitality returned, and he became entirely present, interested in and aware of his surroundings, and perfectly happy to have a visitor. His appearance and response made me think that maybe he wasn't ailing at all. It was hard to reconcile the man who greeted and then chatted with me with Jerry's sober report. He was quintessential Sandy. His mind, at 96, was one of the wonders of the Western world. He didn't even spend a groggy moment trying to figure out who I was. He knew immediately upon opening his eyes. And then, of course, he wanted to know how things were going with me. I managed to ask him a couple of questions about how he was doing, but that clearly did not interest him. He was far more curious about my life, about what was happening at the temple, and any other local or Jewish news I might have to share. Chatting was as natural to him as breathing, and even when I thought I might be tiring him, he showed no signs of losing interest or energy. He spoke Hebrew to me and remembered details about my life I would never have expected or anticipated. If he knew that he was coming to the end of his time on this earth, he gave no sign of it. He was still too busy living, learning, and loving the people closest to him. He knew that he was blessed, and he was grateful for every gift of health and strength that he enjoyed. As his children and grandchildren would describe him, he was passionate about everything. He was a man of ruach, of spirit. He was full of life. He had to be, as his earliest years were marked with some adventure and challenge. As the first child of Benny and Shirley Smook, Sister Ruth arrived 3 years later. He was conceived on board a ship heading to America by his newly married parents who were fleeing Eastern Europe for good. His father, Benny, who was something of a Damon Runyon character, deserted the army during World War I and fled to the United States at that time. He returned to his native village of Hust in the Marmarosh Mountains, I think I got that right, to claim his beloved Shirley and bring her back to the United States with him. However, he was captured and jailed for his previous desertion from the army. He escaped again, thanks to the village rabbi and Benny's own resourcefulness and survival skills. After all, he was the one who had smuggled tobacco to the soldiers at the front during World War I, but of whom his mother said he was always home for Shabbos, which clearly made whatever else he was doing during the week okay. She would know. It was said of her husband, Benny's father and Sandy's grandfather, that he was a rope collector, and sometimes there was a horse at the end of the rope. Evidently, smugglers and horse thieves received special dispensation for being Shomer Shabbos, for observing the Sabbath. There was no way Sanford could escape being a person of ruach, of spirit. Yes, but of a spirit characterized by courage, energy, vitality, a strong will, and a clever mind, a generous heart, and a compassionate, loving nature. The concept embodied in the Hebrew word ruach began in Genesis as the Spirit of God hovering over the waters in the act of creation, and came to refer to the essence and whole range of a person's emotional, intellectual, ethical, and volitional life. Sandy Shore was, as Michael affirmed, a man of ruach, of spirit, in its broadest, most expansive sense. He was conceived by two immigrants fleeing for their lives from the dangers and upheavals of Eastern Europe, and was born January 23rd, 1929, on a kitchen table in the upwardly ambitious, largely immigrant neighborhood of Glenville in Cleveland, because his mother did not trust doctors or hospitals. He was a newborn of spirit. He had to be. Sandy spoke 2 or 3 languages before he spoke English. His mother spoke only Yiddish until Benny insisted she learn English. And in Sandy's corner of Glenville, everyone spoke Yiddish. He vividly remembered going to the Yiddish movie theater every Saturday with a 5-cent ticket he had to purchase earlier in the week, as he could not use money on the Sabbath. He spoke fondly of the old neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else, where he and his friends desperately wanted to be Americans, and thus engaged in every sport available to them, but especially basketball and baseball. As he had to go to Cheder every day after school, the very clever rabbi took his students to play basketball at the Jewish Center on 105th Street after their Hebrew lessons. It is one of the small wonders of Sandy's spirited life that he survived to live to the advanced age of 96, as he was a victim of scarlet fever as a young adolescent. He spent 3 anxious months in the hospital, during which time he developed a heart murmur, and it was unclear whether he would ever walk again. He eventually had a heart valve replacement, but even so, this man of Ruach was heart strong. He had to be. As idealized as the Glenville neighborhood might seem from this nostalgic view, there was nothing easy or particularly appealing about it. It was a place of hard knocks and hard life. It was crowded, poor, and its residents sought to leave as quickly as possible. Even the entrepreneur, Benny, found backbreaking work in the corner grocery store and with his ice truck. He was the person who delivered blocks of ice to keep the ice boxes cool enough for the food that was stored in them. As soon as he was old enough and big enough, Benny enlisted Sonny to carry the blocks of ice up 2, 3, and 4 flights of stairs to deliver to each household. As a result, Sonny became very strong and had a remarkable hand grip to the very end. He learned to drive the ice truck at 14 because all of the men were serving in World War II, and he enjoyed with his father a certain protected status as the kosher Nostra, the Jewish mafia, deemed the delivery of ice an essential service. He was a person of spirit, and sometimes colorfully so. Sandy vividly remembered and loved to retell the story of his family's return to Chust when he was 8 years old and Ruth was 5 or 6. They stayed for 6 months, and he was able to meet all of his cousins and family. It is unclear whether they might have stayed longer under different circumstances, but they realized they had better leave and did so shortly before the Anschluss. After graduating from Glenville High, Sandy's mother wanted him to go to yeshiva and become an Orthodox rabbi. This was not what Sandy wanted, but he obediently started his studies there. As a very smart, independent, curious, and spirited young man, he had the habit of challenging his teachers with questions, especially, "Where is it written?" More often than not, the rabbis either didn't want to answer a student they may have thought was being deliberately provocative, or they didn't know the answer, and in frustration sent him home. Recognizing that he did not want to become a rabbi, Benny asked him what did he want to do, to which Sanford readily answered that he wanted to go to Ohio State, and that is where the rest of his life began, away from his mother. On the train to Columbus, he met Seymour Jacob, who became his best friend and eventual law partner. They joined the Phi Epsilon Pi fraternity, where Sandy made lifelong friends and became treasurer of the fraternity because it paid. He cleared tables in the dining room, also to help support himself. It seems that Sandy was something of a disinterested student. In fact, a casual observer might conclude that he went to college to become a card shark. With his brilliant mind for numbers, calculating probability, analyzing data, and understanding statistical significance, he put himself through school playing poker and gin rummy. He was almost unbeatable. In fact, in later years, when he would play with friends, after the games, their wives made their husbands get their money back from him. He was a spirited man who did not finish school the first time around. It's possible that there might not have been a second time around had he not found Eppie Sussman. In her inimitable way, Eppie asked him, "What are you going to do with the rest of your life?" He was somewhat puzzled, as he had a good job managing thrift shops. She clearly felt there was more for him, but not without finishing school. He had 1 year left. Drive to Columbus right now and re-enroll for the fall. After a weak protest, Sandy drove to Columbus. He not only graduated from the Ohio State University with a degree in finance and accounting, because of the cases he had at the IRS, where he then worked, that involved lawyers, he thought it would be a good idea to earn his law degree, which he did in night school at Cleveland Marshall School of Law, while continuing to work for the IRS and with 3 young children at home, Jeff, Jerry, and Mike. With graduation and a growing family, Sandy and Eppie moved to Shaker Heights, to the house on Scottsdale, and Sandy founded a new law firm with best friend Seymour Jacob, Shore, Jacob, and Fingerhut. The firm evolved into Gonda, Jacob, Shore, and Howard at 75 Public Square. Sandy eventually left the firm and started a leasing company with dear friend David Appisdorf and David Meyer, called Beechwood Leasing. After about 20 years, during which time both Amy and Marty worked there, Sandy retired at 85 years old. But whatever he was doing, he was known as being entirely open, honest, and trustworthy. He went into business with all kinds of people and for all kinds of projects because everyone trusted him. He could point to any number of sites in Cleveland and the suburbs that he had been part of creating. He had a stellar reputation, a very loyal clientele, a sharp, analytical, and shrewd intelligence, a real love of and interest in his clients, an encyclopedic memory, and a sincere desire to help others, which they felt and appreciated. The classic case of his career was the Bloch Trust. Sanford was the only person whom Gretel Bloch trusted, and she made him the executor of her estate. When she passed away, Sandy discovered that she owned stocks, bonds, and companies that no longer existed, that she had money hidden in all kinds of places, which, when Sandy tracked it all down, amounted to a great deal of money with which he created the Bloch Trust, and from which he made charitable contributions to hundreds of Jewish institutions, organizations, synagogues, schools, and causes. As the family described, Sandy had a steady stream of rabbinic visitors hoping for a disbursement. He shepherded that trust with great care and deliberation until he made the last contribution just 3 years ago. He was a man of Ruach, whose spirit reflected his goodness, generosity, compassion, and thoughtfulness, and whose heart was always open to the needs of others. It is no wonder that he, with Epi, had legions of friends from every area of his life and every era of his life. Some, like David Apposdorf and Vic Cohn, he had grown up with. Others, like Seymour Jacob, he met in school. And then there were his business associates, like Irwin Din, and his many, many friends from all of his communal activities, particularly ARMD, the American Red Magen David for Israel, of which he and Epi were president and vice president. He was a big brother through Belfair and president of the Fairmont Temple Brotherhood when his children were growing up. He and Epi were extremely active in our YPC, our Young People's Congregation, also when their children were in grade school. They participated in the monthly Sunday evening study group for over 40 years with 10 to 12 other couples. They were pillars of our Fairmont Temple congregation, and I always loved seeing them at services, programs, events, celebrations. They always greeted me warmly, and it felt so good to see them. Sandy was deeply interested in the welfare of the congregation, and always of its clergy. His friendship spanned generations. When he coached Jeffrey and Michael Shaker Heights Boys Little League, he became acquainted with their friends and with the parents. A generation later, he came to know Sally and Ben's friends when they were still in Cleveland, and then, because he never missed a school event, sports meet, Hazamir concert, klezmer performance, program, or assembly, he came to know Amy's friends as well as Sarah and Zach's, from preschool to middle school, and he knew their parents if they were Jewish. His grandchildren were always amazed. They could not go anywhere in Jewish Cleveland without everyone knowing their Grandpa Sonny. An outing to Corky and Lenny's was a major time commitment because he had to stop and talk to every table. At one such outing, his grandchildren asked him, "Do you know everyone?" He paused for a moment and replied, "Yes." He knew everyone, and everyone was his friend. And with every person, he asked questions about their lives and their well-being, and he remembered the answers. He was a man of Ruach, after all. He was the very best dad in the world. That's a quotation from Jerry. Supportive, encouraging, present in their lives. With Epi, they allowed their children room to grow and to make mistakes. The only question they asked was, "Are you doing the best that you can?" He shared with each of them their successes, and in the face of setbacks was there to provide perspective, comfort, and the encouragement to try again or try differently. In a family where Epi was the acknowledged tough one, Sandy, though he expected no less than she did, he provided a bit of balance, a somewhat softer approach, a more laid-back attitude. As Deborah and Amy saw it, he was the gentle, teddy bear type. He was no pushover. Even with Epi, he would let her run the show until he was quite sure she was headed down the wrong path, and then he would step in, firmly and finally. As stubborn as they both could be, he always knew how lucky he was, that she had made all the difference in the way his life unfolded. When a man of spirit meets a woman of spirit, sparks may fly, but their love illuminates the world in which we live. After high school, she went off to the Ohio State University, joined a sorority, and through her roommate, June, and his friend, Alan Adele, she met Sanford Shore. He had known Epi when they were both kids, and she was his sister's bunkmate at Camp Wise. When they met up again, at Sanford's instigation, He was interested and then smitten. At the end of their first meeting at college, he said, "We should go out sometime." To which Eppie replied, "Some special time or any time?" To which Alan responded, "Why don't we all go out Saturday night?" From that Saturday night, Eppie and Sanford did not miss a Saturday night for the next 70 years. They were a power couple before the term was invented. They both worked successfully, they were both involved communally, they raised a wonderful family, and seemingly never missed a beat. They walked hand in hand with strength, courage, vitality, and energy because of their deep love and respect for each other. Together they raised the four greatest treasures of their life, Jeff, Jerry, Mike, and Carrie, Zichronah Livracha. And when the time came, they joyfully welcomed Deborah, Amy, and Marty into their family as true children of their hearts, never as children-in-law. Sandy's father, Benny, had told him to never go to bed angry. With Sandy's Hungarian stubbornness and Eppie's resolute determination, that took some very late nights of negotiation. After all, she was always right. She was also wise and loving and never said no to Sanford. As he said, she was great. They traveled together all over Europe, to Israel, Australia, Malaysia, and Tahiti. They played golf, tennis, and bowled. They shared a subscription to Blossom with the Cones. They shared a very full social life with a host of friends. Most of all, they shared a profound love for each other, a love that sustained the loss of an infant child, Cindy Ann, and the tragic loss of their beloved Carrie, a loss that the entire family sustained together. And despite her trepidation, both Eppie and Sandy, with the entire family, welcomed Bracha into Marty's life and the Shore family. As an aside, I will share with you that Sandy's last name was chosen by Eppie when she decided she did not want to be married to Sanford Smook. She looked through the catalog of customers at work to find something short, easy to pronounce, easy to spell, that started with an S, so that she wouldn't have to change her initials from her maiden name of Sussman. As much as Sanford and Eppie enjoyed their children, they were thrilled when their grandchildren arrived. Jeff and Deborah's Jessica, now with Peter, Brandon and his Kristen, with great-grandchildren Wesley and Ava, Michael and Amy's Sarah and Zachary, and Carrie, Zichronah Livracha, and Marty's Ben and Kristen, and Solly and Jay. They all knew him as exceedingly generous, beyond proud of every grandchild. He was fond of saying, "I have no unintelligent grandchildren, and I have no unattractive grandchildren." Once he burst out spontaneously at a family meal, "Look at all the degrees that are sitting around this table." He was proud. His children remember how they would all do their homework together after dinner, he with his adding machine, and they with their notebooks and assignments that he would check when they finished. He was a voracious reader of the news, secular, Jewish, and sports, often while munching on pistachios. He was a man of ruach, a spirited man who was full of life and love, especially for his family, which he loved more than life itself, and the boundaries of that family extended to everyone. He was warm, inclusive, welcoming. He loved people, loved their stories, loved to learn about their various backgrounds, cultures, and circumstances, as he loved to share his own. One of his most favorite places to do that was while driving his Cadillac. He always drove a Cadillac. He would take his children and then later his grandchildren on rides. The grandchildren called them Grandpa Sonny trips. They drove with no specific destination. They drove until they saw something interesting, when they would stop and spend the day exploring. It was Sonny's version of a spazier, an aimless walk or stroll, or a pleasurable journey without a specific destination. Spazier can also mean to explore, create memories, or tell stories, which is exactly what he did. It was one of Sandy's favorite activities, replete with stories he had told numerous times before, always with a, "Tell me if you've heard this." But somehow, no one ever did or didn't succeed in letting him know. He would spazier through a story that seemed to be going nowhere and never quite arrived at any destination, but meandered to many lovely places along the way. Every story he told somehow included the story of the 1950 Glenville Boys Basketball Championship, and sometimes touched on his experience as the Ohio State men's basketball team manager. He and Sarah succeeded in researching 8 generations of their family tree, first assigned when she was a student at the Ognon Day School. Sandy used to take Ben, Solly, and Zach to the same barber he used. As Jessica acknowledged, there were always loads of snacks at their grandparents' house, and Grandpa Sonny loved to brag on us. After Eppie died, Sandy, who could not sing, continued her tradition of leaving a voicemail rendition of the song Happy Birthday for every child and grandchild's birthday. His favorite words after an extended spazier through a story were, "The point of the story is," which did not necessarily mean there was an actual point forthcoming. Perhaps that is because the ultimate point is the story itself, or the storyteller. In a paraphrase of the great poet William Butler Yeats, we might ask, how can we tell the storyteller from the story? The point is that a person of Ruach, a spirited man, inspires each of us to inhabit our own stories with goodness, kindness, wisdom, generosity, and love. The point of the story is that is exactly what Sanford Shore did every day of his storied life, and we and our world are better because he brought his spirit into each of our lives. Zichrono livracha. May the memory of this beloved, spirited man be always for blessing, and let us say, Amen. I call now on Jeff and then Ben to share their reminiscences and recollections of father and grandfather.
Well, it's nice to see all of you, even though under sad circumstances. I'm not going to tell you all about my dad's life and his many accomplishments, because I think Cantor Sager did a wonderful job of that. Thank you. How's that? Okay, so I'm going to try not to repeat what Cantor Sager said, although we had no commonality of working on whatever we were going to say today, but some of the stories and points do overlap because we all had the same experiences with my dad. But I'm really speaking on behalf of my sister Jerry and my brother Michael and myself, and the three of us sat down last night and probably spent 2 hours telling stories about my dad. And so this is a collaboration, and we all really felt so blessed because we had a great father, and he never differentiated between us or between the boys and girls. We all played the same sports. Jerry was shooting baskets, Carrie was playing soccer, and we all did the same chores. Nobody got to say, well, that's girls' work or that's boys' work. Everybody cleaned the kitchen, everybody raked the leaves, everybody shoveled snow, even when it was 17 below zero. My dad did not care. we were all equals, and he never compared one kid to the other, which, as adults looking back, was a wonderful thing. And he just wanted us, as Cantor Sager said, he always impressed upon us, do your best, whatever that is. And he was, I remember him telling me, he goes, I don't care about the results. I just need to know that you're doing your best. And that stuck with me. But whatever we did, my dad loved to play with his kids. And we played hearts, and we played bridge, and we played baseball, and he coached our little league teams. And no matter how tired he was when he got home from work and had been lawyering all day, or maybe he had a temple meeting, if we wanted to go out and play catch, even in the dark, my dad would go out and play catch. And when I was a little kid, he put a basketball goal up on the basket, and we were all shooting baskets. And my dad loved to come outside and shoot baskets with us and really just be there. And he had a very kid-like spirit. He was super competitive, and he really never cut us any slack. But he just loved to play with his kids, and we all got, the benefit of that. And as the cantor said, we would sit around the table. We were all different ages. We all had different homework, but we had to sit at the kitchen table with our work. In hindsight, he was probably just, in his own way, making sure we did our homework. But we were all sitting around the table, and he had his adding machine. He just, and then he would check our work. And every other weekend, he would take us to the public library. I think it was like Lee Road in Van Aken. And everybody could get 4 books. And then we would go to Baskin-Robbins, and we would have ice cream. And as a result of that, we all became avid readers and ice cream addicts. And then we would go home, and first thing we had to do was sit down at the kitchen table, and he had to write down all the books and who had checked out which books, because 2 weeks later, before we could go to the library, we had to scramble around and make sure we'd gotten the 16 books together, because he didn't want to pay late fees. And he shared his love of travel, not just showing us his slides from his travels all over the world, which he loved to do, and telling his millions of great stories, but he took us places. We piled in a station wagon and drove to Gettysburg to see a reenactment of the Gettysburg Address. And he took us to Washington, D.C., all of us with my grandma Emma, driving to Washington, D.C., and going to see the sights. And he was there with us every step of the way, except he was not climbing the Washington Monument. And we kids ran up to the top and ran back down. He's like, I'm waiting at the bottom. Good luck. And he created a Jewish home for us that was so consistent, and you could just feel his joy and his dedication to his faith and his people. And he sent us all to Fairmont Temple, where we all learned to read Hebrew, and we got a Jewish education that I really didn't recognize or appreciate as a child, but as I would go to bar mitzvahs and weddings all over the country, because my wife's family's from Philadelphia and they have a big family, and I realized, wow, I could read Hebrew. I actually can follow this service, and I've been to Jewish services in other countries, and I'm following along, which is no reflection of me. It is a reflection of how I was pickled in the brine of Judaism in my house. And he had us not just go through bar mitzvah and go to Hebrew school. We went through confirmation, and then we stayed on and we graduated high school from Fairmont Temple. And I didn't like it, and I protested, but we all went. And looking back, I think that was a real blessing for us. And he sent us to college, and he was patient with some of us who didn't finish in 4 years. And he just kind of hung in there with us. And no matter what we did to frustrate him, to aggravate him, or to disappoint him, he was always there. He was there for us. And we felt that love, and we knew he had our backs. And as Jerry and I have talked, when a kid feels that and lives that, it gives them a foundation to go on in their life and a confidence that you can't get if you don't have a great dad. Now, don't get me wrong, my dad was not perfect. He was never on time. And the irony of it was, he always wore a watch. But I think it was decorative. And even in his last days, he was always asking us, what time is it? And he's laying in a bed. He's not even getting up. And he wants to know what time it is. And then 2 days before he passed, he wanted Jerry to get him his watch. And, you know, he was just silly in that way. But a lifetime of wearing a watch did not make him prompt. And so he was late to pick us up from Sunday school all the time. And, you know, Fairmont Temple would let out Sunday at noon, and all the kids are leaving, and all the teachers are leaving, and there's the three of us. And the temple office lady was like, is your dad coming to pick you up? It's like 20 minutes after noon. And we were like, yeah, you know, he's always late, you know. And he would come and get us. And this didn't begin with my childhood. My grandma Emma, who was Eppie's mom, was so worried that he would be late to his own wedding. She insisted that the night before he stay at her house, and she would make sure he showed up to his wedding on time. And my son remembered when my parents would come to visit, and my son and I and my dad were going out to play golf, and I made a 9:30 tea time, and when my dad asked me what time was the tea time, I told him 10. And we got to the golf course. I think I had it backwards. I told him 9:30 and the tea time was 10. So we were late for 9:30, but we were there at 10. And then he found out that I had lied to him, so we would not miss our tea time. And he was so angry with me. And that was my dad. So not only was he late, but occasionally he was a little stubborn. And he didn't like to admit that he was wrong. And I remember Deborah and I would go take golf vacations with my mom and dad, and we're out in Scottsdale, Arizona. And he's remembering a restaurant that he went to the last time he was in Scottsdale, Arizona. It was really great. And he can't quite remember the name, and he can't quite remember where it's located. And we are aimlessly driving around Scottsdale for an hour, and now it's getting late, and we're all really hungry. And we just want to go anywhere at this point. And thank God my mom spotted a Capitol Grill and said, Sonny, pull over. And we got to eat. Then at the restaurant, he's still thinking, mumbling to himself, I could have found that restaurant. And we were golfing in Hilton Head, and there are ponds and signs that say, beware of the alligators, stay away from the pond, don't go near the pond. And we're playing golf, and my dad and he would come on these golf trips with a giant bag of like 100 golf balls that he'd probably fished out of the woods at Hawthorne Valley Country Club. So it's not like we're going to run out of golf balls. And he would hit his ball in the pond, and he's standing like next to the sign that says, beware of the alligators, leaning in with his retriever. And, I wanted him to keep going. There are golfers behind us. I don't want the alligator to eat my father. And I remember my mom telling him, Sonny, when you fall in, we're not getting you. We're going on. And one last little cute story. We rented a Winnebago. My dad wanted us to take this motorhome trip. We rented a Winnebago. And to say that my father was not mechanically inclined would be a great understatement. We all knew my mom got things fixed around the house, and my dad never did. So we have the Winnebago, and we pull up to the KOA, and it's dark, and he's got me and Michael out there, and we're going to hook up the septic drain. And he does it wrong, and the waste goes all over the ground by the campsite. And it's dark. And we go in, and we're talking with my mom, and she kind of pokes her head out, and she goes, we're leaving. And we just went to another KOA. And as the cantor said, well, I got one other little cute thing that my sister reminded me. My dad grew up in the Depression, and he grew up poor. He never threw out food. It didn't matter how much mold was on it, he could cut it off. The man was famous for eating a bagel that was like a hockey puck. And he could cut off the butt end of a hard salami with a raw onion, and you would hear everything crunching. And I was like, Dad, just throw that away. Oh, no, it's still good. That was my dad, wandering aimlessly through the countryside. And I know that Cantor spoke of it, and maybe it was a little more enjoyable and romanticized for the grandchildren. But for his children, on Sunday afternoon, we were like, Dad, where are we going? I'll tell you when we get there. Very infuriating. And we figured out at some point that we did not have a destination. We were just wandering through the countryside, and then he would find something. He goes, well, we're here, and get out. And sometimes we would have an amazing time. Sometimes we would just drive and then come home, and then, the kids and I, we would powwow and go, that man is crazy. And at the dinner table, he loved to challenge us with math questions and use big fancy words that we didn't know. And then he would always tell, what does that mean? Well, look it up. Every night, go look it up. Go look it up. And I think he had fun with it. He was omnipotent. Jerry was vociferous. He wanted some of the proper decorum. And he was not stubborn. He was resolute. That was my dad. But he kept his word. We had a dog only because he had made a promise to Jerry that if she got a B in English, she could have a dog. My mother was not happy. She did not want a dog. And she was very vocal about how much she did not want a dog, but Jerry found this stray dog and brought it home, and she was like, Dad, a promise is a promise. And she had made her B, and we kept that dog. And mostly Jerry took care of the dog, and for a year the dog was with me in college. But when we were home, if the temperature was below 10 degrees, my dad walked that dog. And he kept in our lives in a way that I think few parents do. He was still checking the spelling and grammar on Jerry's papers when she was 50 years old and had master's degrees until he finally said, how long do I have to keep checking your work? He did Jerry and Mike's tax returns until he was 90 and finally said, you should get another accountant. He wrote a handwritten stock report on ledger paper. God only knows how long it took him because it had 9 columns of data, including the price to earnings ratio and dividends and the volume of trading. And he's handwriting it with a number 2 pencil. And then he would make copies and mail it to all his kids. And I think he just did that, for his own fun, but it kept his mind sharp. But above all, our dad lived a life guided by his principles and his values, which he didn't just tell his children, although, my God, he told us so much. But he showed us in how he lived his life and how he treated people every day. And he treated people like everyone was his friend, like he was genuinely interested in them. And he just loved bigger. I'm going to get choked up. He loved life. And he was just amazing. And he told me when I was 17, and Jerry told me she had the same conversation with him. How come we don't live in a nicer house? How come we don't drive a nicer car? And he told me what I now kind of look back as, one of his principles of life. Nobody really cares how much money you have. What matters in life are the children that you raise. Did you teach them to be decent people that you could be proud of? And secondly, the way you treat people in your everyday life. Do you treat the president of the bank the way you treat the guy who shines his shoes? And that is the measure of a man. Because that's how people will remember you, not for how much money you have, but what kind of a person you were. And I probably didn't get that when I was 17 because I wanted a nicer house and a nicer car. But at some point, I got old and I thought back and I was like, God, he really knew something. He kind of had it figured out. And 100 years ago, there were sort of competing philosophies about the great American male. One was the rugged individualist, the guy who went off on his own and, amassed a fortune and was, all about that. But there was another philosophy about a meaningful life and how to live one, and that was to give yourself to others, to find a greater cause, to realize that the cause is more important than your own selfish pain and pleasure. And that is how my dad lived his life. And I'm going to sort of paraphrase what Cantor Sager said, and obviously it struck both of us, because everyone here has heard my dad tell one of his many long rambling stories that loses the listener, and that at some point he would say, and the point to the story is, and without pausing, he would just go right to the next story. But really, the point to the story was to live your life to the fullest, to love your God, your spouse, your kids, your family, your community, more than you love yourself. And that's how my dad lived. He was a man who didn't have a mean or selfish bone. He really was a good heart. And he lived his life in a way that helped and guided and loved and uplifted other people. And that is why he will be missed.
So in true Grandpa Sonny fashion, I'm going to repeat some stories. So I want to begin by expressing my appreciation to my brother and our cousins, the Council of Grandkids, for allowing me to speak on their behalf. Not all of us were present for the session with Cantor Sager where we got to share memories. So we got together yesterday, and I followed her lead and asked for memories and stories that had stuck with them. And everyone was sharing, and I was surprised to find myself thinking of the word proud, which struck me as odd because Grandpa was not a man who took great pride in his accomplishments. He was quick to highlight the achievements of others and give away credit. And at the numerous banquets and ceremonies recognizing his incredible accomplishments, he always humbly accepted with an air that seemed to say, okay, enough about me. And then as we kept going, it clicked that the one thing he never had any shortage of pride in was us, his grandkids. There wasn't a single thing that we could do that would keep him from pointing to us and saying, that's my grandkid, to anyone who would care to listen. And when we gather, as Uncle Jeff said, he would look around and just marvel at how many academic degrees we had sitting around the table. And he'd say, if Epi and I could have skipped the kids and gone straight to grandkids, we would have. Grandpa always wanted to know everything that we were doing and everything we were involved in. Phone calls would always start with, hello, Benjamin, hello, Jessica, hello, Zachary, it's your grandfather, as if we had forgotten who we called, and would quickly turn into a deep dive of what had been going on in our lives since we last spoke, even if it had only been a day or two. He would ask about work and hobbies and relationships, and every word was absorbed with genuine, curious interest. He would listen with rapt attention and always finish the conversation with the same question, are you happy? And as long as the answer was yes, he was in full support. There was never any judgment or expectation to follow a specific path. He would tell us life isn't a straight line, and that there's a lot to be gained in experiences and a lot to be learned from failure. He liked to remind us that in our lives we would make thousands of choices. Some will be good, some will be bad, but at the end of the day, you're just trying to make more good ones than bad ones, and there will always be another one coming up that can help tip the balance toward the positive. Whenever we were being hard on ourselves for a particularly bad choice, he'd remind us that he didn't have any dumb grandchildren and he didn't have any ugly grandchildren. Now, let me be clear, his curiosity did not mean he understood what we were talking about. There were plenty of times when he would listen and nod, and when we were done, he would say, "I don't get it. I'm just glad you're getting it." But you could be sure that he was taking in every word, and without fail, you'd get a newspaper clipping in the mail or an email with a link or an unscheduled phone call to talk about the thing he had seen or heard that reminded him of what you had been talking about, even if it only had a passing connection to the topic. And he never forgot what we were involved in or mixed up one grandkid with another. If one of us loved music, he'd take the grandchild to concerts at Blossom, sports fans went to Cavs and Guardians games, and theater kids went to Playhouse Square to see a new musical or one of his favorite classics. And even though all the cousins were so different, he made time to get involved in our hobbies and would be invested in the things that we enjoyed. And he wanted to share the things that he enjoyed with us. Every grandchild and every child could look forward to a monthly envelope containing a seasonal greeting card that was out of season and was just what he had in a box somewhere, and his stock suggestions for the month. Each copy of the multi-page list was painstakingly handwritten, and there was no guide to tell you what he was suggesting, but it was just a way for him to show us his hobbies, as we so often showed him ours. Someone more cynical might say that he was just being a grandpa and that he was doing what anyone would do for their grandkids, but that's not true for Grandpa Sonny. He was encouraging us to be ourselves and to follow our hearts. He was fully aware and unashamed of who he was, and wanted us to find the same peace and happiness in our lives that he had found in his. He was open about his love for his family and his friends. He wore his heart on his sleeve, and he was a crier. Whenever he was sad or happy, he never shied away from his emotions and never hesitated to express love, especially to Grandma Eppie. Their marriage showed us what to look for in a partner, how to be a good partner ourselves, and how to build a solid relationship founded on mutual respect. And his love wasn't limited to just his blood. It was gladly extended to the people we brought into our lives, and by extension, his. He was loving and welcoming and charming to all of our partners as if they were family from the moment he met them. He wouldn't always call them by the right names, but he would ask about them and how they were doing, and as always, his curiosity was genuine. He made sure that all our partners knew he loved them, not only because they made his grandchildren happy, but because they were good people who were worthy of his love. It's not a secret that Grandpa lost a lot of family, but he was always proud of how big his family had grown and was still growing and would continue to grow. The meaning of family to Grandpa was more than just blood. It was about connections. And after 96 years, he had more connections than a normal person would be able to remember, but Grandpa Sonny maintained every thread with ease and grace. He knew everyone's brother or niece or wife or business partner. Entering or leaving a restaurant or a grocery store with him would take at least an hour as he stopped to greet everyone and ask how they were doing. He would constantly tell us of distant relatives we had in other cities, states, or countries, and would remind us to let him know the next time we were heading out that way so he could set up a meeting. It was important to him that we knew we weren't alone, and I don't think any of us ever felt alone around him. And even though we won't be getting any more phone calls or emails or stock suggestions, the lessons he taught us, the lives he touched, and the immeasurable effect he's had on so many people reminds us that he's still here.
Thank you for those beautiful, moving, evocative tributes of a very special man. Oh God, you give us loved ones and make them the strength of our life, the light of our eyes. They depart and leave us bereft on a lonely way, but you are the living fountain from which our healing flows. To you the stricken look for comfort, and the sorrow-laden for consolation. O God, we see life as through windows that open on eternity. We see that love endures and the soul endures, as you, O God, endure forever. We see that the years are more than grass that withers, more than flowers that fade. They weave a timeless pattern in a world that is the dwelling place of your love and glory. Please rise. מלא רחמים, שוכן במרומי. אמצעי מנוחה נכונה, תחת כנפי השכינה, עם קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר רקיע, מזהירים את נשמת ישראל מאיר בן בנימין ושרה, שהלך לעולמו. בעל הרחמים יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויסרו חיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Sanford Shore, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. You may be seated for a moment.
Oh, good, because my mom, she's going out, but I'm waiting for, she wasn't in slump, but I'm like, and she couldn't watch now because she was getting injections. She's my husband. But yeah, so now I'm sure, but I think yeah. All right, so I don't know. I hope so. Yeah. That's what I thought too, maybe. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. I'm going to say hello real quick. How are you?
Behind the suitor right here. But it doesn't look like any good for that house. What's that? What's that? They got wrong.
Is Amy just getting things sorted?
She's changing a diaper.
Okay.
So I can just. I'm leave it. I don't want to like.
We can put Ava in.
It's only one hour ride.
We can put Ava in already if you want.
Yeah, I mean Wes is pretty easy. I just want to make sure that my wife gets her jacket. But I told her. Yeah, I can put it back on the chair, and then we